Welcome to Midnight Rain Tales. The world sleeps, and the rain begins to whisper. In this quiet hour, stories drift through the night air, soft, chilling, unforgettable. Here, under the midnight sky, we share the tales the rain refuses to forget. Stay close and listen. The memory clings, sharp as frost, my palm flat against the immense time-scarred timber of the door. Late afternoon light, thin and amber, bled across the cathedral's cracked facade, deepening the wounds of ages. My whole life, I, Elias, had traced the perimeter of this stone behemoth, its portals invariably chained, its stained glass eyes shuttered in perpetual twilight. But that day, inexplicably, the wrought iron gate stood partially ajar, a dark invitation. A thrill, sharp and illicit, tightened my chest. Piety had always been my compass, yet an undeniable magnetism radiated from within those walls, pulling me across the threshold of reason. Without conscious thought, my weight leaned into the wood. Ancient hinges screamed in protest. A flurry of questions stormed my mind, yet my feet carried me forward. The air inside struck me first, a sepulchral chill laced with the dust of forgotten decades. Neglect reigned absolute. Dust lay thick as velvet on the pews, some splintered and ravaged by rot. On the towering walls, paint peeled back like sunburnt skin, revealing patches of weeping darkness beneath. A phantom scent, burnt wax, and the ghost of incense hung heavy, weaving a strange disquiet through me. I eased the great door shut behind me, the resulting boom caromed through the vast emptiness, a lonely thunderclap. My breath hitched, shallow and quick against the sudden silence. My heart hammered a nervous rhythm against my ribs. Once a vessel of reverence, this place now felt like a crypt, where shadows pooled thick and watchful in every recess. Hesitant steps forward, seeking silence, yet my soles grated against loose flagstones. A pause, and then the barest filament of sound, a sibilant murmur, Latin by its cadence. My grasp of the old tongue is fragmented, gleaned from years of liturgy, but the words remained elusive, dissolving just beyond comprehension, distant yet disturbingly intimate. My gaze swept the nave, searching the gloom, utterly deserted. The echo vanished swiftly, leaving me adrift in uncertainty. Had I imagined it? The wind, I reasoned, a draft sighing through unseen cracks. My eyes found a smaller side door, promising passage into a constricted hallway. Dimness clung to this corridor, punctuated sporadically by fractured light fixtures overhead. The walls were a gallery of faded piety, religious portraits in chipped frames, their subjects obscured by grime and shadow. Here my footfalls felt obscenely loud, intrusive. I tried to decipher the faces staring from the canvases, but the pervasive murk resisted scrutiny. Deeper I went until the passage opened into what might have been a minor chapel, or perhaps the skeletal remains of a confessional bank. Several dark wood booths stood sentinel against one wall, their doors askew, hanging precariously or missing altogether. The air thickened with the cloying aroma of mildew and decaying timber that groaned with my every subtle shift in weight. A clammy film slicked my skin. A tremor traced my spine despite the warmth of my coat. Curiosity overriding caution, I peered into one shadowed recess. The penitent's seat gaped, upholstery shredded, stained scraps of paper littered the narrow shelf. Time had bleached most illegible, yet fragments of Latin surfaced. Domine miserere. An unforeseen dread coiled in my gut. The sensation of trespassing upon secrets meant to molder undisturbed. My fingers, trembling slightly, closed around a small sheaf of notes tucked behind the broken kneeler. Lines described apparitions near the altar, fleeting shapes of brilliance. They spoke of abrupt flashes of light, disembodied chanting, the distinct sound of footsteps pacing empty aisles. One entry bore a date from decades past, inscribed in a shaky, desperate hand. Another chronicled voices from the darkness, voices that named personal failings aloud. My mouth turned to dust. An urge to replace the papers, to flee, warred with a ravenous need to know more. I read on. A recurring theme emerged, a presence within the cathedral, one privy to confessions yet unspoken. A writer claimed to have heard their own shames whispered down the echoing nave. Another felt an unseen touch upon their shoulder during prayer. My stomach clenched, nerves singing a high, thin note of alarm. Faith has its mysteries, its profound silences, but this felt wrong. Not the hallowed quiet of sanctuary, but something invasive, charged with an energy I could neither name nor comprehend. Carefully, I refolded the brittle pages, returning them to their hiding place. Taking them felt like theft, like inviting retribution from whatever guarded this desolation. Retreating across the nave, venturing deeper toward the heart of the structure, my steps faltered on the uneven floor. Each scrape, each stumble reverberated unnaturally. The whispers returned, faint as breath on glass, yet undeniably present, seeming to emanate from the very stones around me. I froze, straining my ears in the thick silence. The murmurs ceased, only to be replaced by a single chillingly distinct sound. My own name, Elias, breathed softly into the void. My shoulders locked. Sweat prickled my skin. It is a profoundly unsettling thing to hear your name called in a place you believe to be empty. Is anyone there? My voice, thin and reedy, was swallowed by the immensity. Are you playing games? Silence answered, profound and absolute. I scanned the rows of pews, searching for any flicker of movement. Wood groaned softly nearby, the sound of settling weight. My heart became a frantic drum against my bones. Dropping behind a solid oak bench, I peered through the gaps, seeking equilibrium, finding only stagnant air and deepening shadows. Nothing. Utterly deserted. Rising, a jolt shot through my chest as the few intact overhead lights flickered violently, then died, plunging the interior into near total darkness, save for the ethereal shafts of light lancing down from the high stained glass windows. And then the Latin chanting resurfaced, soft, pervasive. I compelled myself forward, focusing on the central aisle that arrowed toward the altar. Dust lay like a shroud upon it, the once white altar cloth now a dingy gray, tall candlesticks listed at precarious angles. The silence here was different, pressurized, expectant. Reaching out, my fingers grazed the altar surface, coming away filmed with grime. The stone beneath was frigid, rough-hewn. The whispers surged again, louder now, insistent, weaving my name through fragments of Latin. Elias Confiteor Poenitentium. My throat constricted, words failed me. Abruptly, a current of cold air sliced through the cathedral's stillness. The door behind me remained shut, the high windows sealed. Yet the breeze was palpable, stirring my clothes, raising gooseflesh on my neck. A swift turn, and my eyes caught a flicker, a transient luminescence near the rearmost pew. Less than a heartbeat, but undeniably there. A nebulous glow, vaguely anthropomorphic. I stood rooted, paralyzed. The fine hairs on my arms bristled, my knees threatened to buckle. My gaze remained fixed on the spot, waiting, but the apparition did not return. A ragged exhale escaped me. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath. My thoughts scattered like startled birds. "Flee," logic screamed. "Stay," whispered a deeper, more perilous curiosity. Closing my eyes, I offered a fragmented prayer for clarity, then opened them again to the same vista of decay, heavy with an unseen occupancy. I would leave, I decided then, for today, but a hook was set deep within me. The need to understand was a current too strong to fight. Sleep offered no refuge in the ensuing days. The cathedral haunted my waking thoughts, its dust and shadows overlaying the mundane routines of work, the familiar rituals of my parish church. Dreams became extensions of its corridors, filled with whispering gloom and the spectral glow. I'd wake slick with sweat, heart pounding, convinced I'd heard my name echoing in the confines of my own room. After several such nights, the compulsion became unbearable. I had to return. For proof, I told myself, proof that my mind wasn't fracturing. Re-entering the sanctuary, the chills seemed to have intensified, biting deeper. I tried a light switch near the entrance. It was dead. My small torch cut a nervous swath through the darkness, illuminating more scattered debris, broken tiles, elaborate cobwebs like macabre lacework, drifts of ancient bulletins. The emptiness felt profound, yet paradoxically inhabited. A faint rustling near the confessional drew me toward the side chapel, my steps deliberately soft. There, nestled amongst the decay, lay more notes. One looked fresher than the others, the ink less faded. "Voices that know my faults," it read. An unseen force demanding my confessions. Initials were scrawled beneath, blurred and indistinct. Sweat beaded on my forehead. A soft creak echoed directly behind me. I spun, the flashlight beam stabbing wildly at floor and wall. Nothing. Then the whispers eddied back, swirling through the passages like phantom drafts. My heart hammered, a knot twisted low in my gut. I held still, listening intently. The susurrus sharpened, gained clarity. My name again, Elias. And then they spoke of regrets I barely acknowledged even to myself. Shames buried beneath years of denial. Transgressions from youth. Choices whose weight I still carried in secret. My head swam. The blood seemed to drain from my face. "Show yourself." The shout tore from my throat, raw and desperate. Only the echo answered, mocking my fear. My hand clenched the flashlight, knuckles white. I retreated toward the altar, drawn by an instinct that this was the epicenter. The air grew thick, resistant, like wading through water. Breathing became a conscious effort. My pulse thundered in my ears. Reaching the altar steps, I swept the torchlight around. There, for a sliver of a second, the glow manifested again, hovering near the tabernacle's outline. My hand trembled violently, the beam dancing, then gone, leaving only disturbed dust motes glittering in the artificial light. This time I found my voice, though it quavered. "I'm here," I said to the oppressive emptiness. "I don't know what you want, but I am here." The words felt foolish, yet I continued. "Forgive my intrusion if I have disrespected this place." The unnatural wind rose again, swirling around the altar, and beneath my feet I sensed, rather than heard, a low chanting vibrating up through the stone floor. My mouth was parchment dry. A voice, sharp and immediate, whispered directly beside my ear, "Confess." I recoiled, nearly dropping the light. Words deserted me. My mind flooded with a lifetime's inventory of failings. A hand pressed against my chest, trying to contain the frantic beating within. "I'm sorry," I stammered again, the apology weak and inadequate. The subterranean chanting subsided. I waited in the charged silence, uncertain. After several agonizing minutes, I turned and stumbled toward the exit, feeling utterly depleted, profoundly disturbed. The following week saw me return 4 more times, caught in a cycle of dread and compulsion. Each visit, the whispers intensified, their demands growing more specific, more personal. They named events, cited dates, dredged up moments of dishonesty, crises of faith I thought buried forever. The pressure was immense. I left each time feeling physically ill, lightheaded, yet the mystery pulled me back, an addict seeking a destructive fix. By the 5th visit, the cathedral felt sentient. Doors I distinctly remembered leaving open were now shut. Pews seemed subtly rearranged. Footsteps echoed mine down empty aisles, always ceasing the moment I turned. More notes appeared, tucked into hymn books, wedged in crevices, all variations on the same theme. Voices that knew secrets, fleeting glimpses of light, the oppressive sense of being watched, judged. No one ever described seeing a person, only the glow, only the voices. My well-being eroded. Sleep became a luxury, concentration impossible. Concerned friends inquired about my health. I mumbled excuses about a persistent cold. Prayer in my own church brought no solace, my thoughts inevitably straying back to the decaying grandeur and its insidious demands. A chilling conviction grew. Something resided there, something ancient and aware, that fed on human weakness, on guilt. I am not prone to superstition, but the evidence of its effect on me was undeniable. One final visit. I resolved it would be the last. I would offer what it seemed to want, then sever the connection for good. I chose late afternoon again, unwilling to face the deepest night within those walls. A small wooden cross rested heavy in my pocket. A thicker coat served as armor against the pervasive chill. Stepping inside, the cold was immediate, visceral, cutting through layers of fabric to settle deep in my bones. The gloom was thicker than before, the sparse daylight barely penetrating the nave. I walked directly to the altar, stood before the dusty cloth and leaning candlestands, forcing my gaze forward. My voice, when I began to speak, trembled, but I did not stop. I confessed everything, every remembered sin, every hidden doubt, every failing that burdened my soul. I listed them plainly, without adornment, the raw catalog of my imperfections spoken into the waiting silence. Sweat slicked my palms, my legs felt unsteady. The chanting erupted louder than ever, seeming to spiral around me, a vortex of sound. My ears rang, every muscle in my body strained against an invisible pressure. The air itself felt like a physical weight upon my shoulders, yet I pushed onward, forcing the words out, admitting fault after fault. The voices swelled to a roar, then ceased with shocking abruptness. The ensuing silence was absolute, so profound I could hear the frantic pulse in my own ears. For one terrifying, suspended moment, the glow materialized directly before me, brighter, more defined than ever before. My eyes burned from staring, unblinking. Then it imploded, vanishing back into the darkness. I stood there for a long minute, maybe two, breathing raggedly, mind reeling. A tentative sense of release began to bloom in my chest. The slow unknotting of a tightly wound spring. The whispers were gone. I listened, straining, hearing only the sound of my own respiration. The air remained cold, but the oppressive presence had lessened, as if sated, having received its due. Slowly, deliberately, I walked back toward the entrance, resisting the urge to look back. I stepped out into the fading afternoon light, pulling the heavy door shut with a decisive thud. Since that day, I have not returned. Sometimes passing by, I see the gates are once again chained, the windows dark voids. The cathedral sleeps its derelict sleep. Whether others still hear the whispers within its walls or glimpse the spectral light, I cannot know. I only know that when I finally surrendered the secrets held captive inside me, the voices relinquished their claim. Yet a residue of unease remains whenever my path takes me near that place, a chilling certainty of being observed by something cold and patient, still waiting. My faith endures but feels thinner, more fragile. The echo of that voice calling my name in the darkness, that, I suspect, will remain with me always. Each day entails the same pilgrimage through this building, floor by numbered floor. It's the marrow of my occupation. Traversing corridors, a cursory glance at each portal, sniffing the air for anomalies, confirming the electric pulse in the ceiling lights. Monotony is the usual texture of these hours, save for the 5th level. The change is palpable the instant the elevator sighs open. Here, the atmosphere thickens, acquiring a viscous weight. The silence isn't empty. It hums, prickling the skin along my arms. Official ledgers proclaim this floor utterly untenanted, yet spectral hints of habitation persist. A sliver of luminescence beneath a door, the ghost of a voice whispering through plaster, or sometimes carried on the dead air, the melancholic strains of antiquated music from a distant radio. An unblinking scrutiny follows my every step along its length. There are moments I pause, straining to hear, convinced beyond reason that something concealed by drywall and dust listens in return. This post became mine roughly a year past. The initial weeks unfolded with predictable calm. Level by level, I'd trace my circuit, inspecting refuse rooms, ensuring the stairwell access remained secured, clearing hallways of stray, forgotten objects. Floors 1 through 4 offered no deviation from the expected, but the fifth declared its otherness immediately. The corridor seemed to swallow light, remaining tenebrous even with fixtures blazing. Certain bulbs engaged in a persistent, nervous flicker. I'd noted them for replacement, swapped them myself more than once, yet the stuttering light endured. The management employs a rudimentary spreadsheet for tenant tracking. Every soul residing within these walls must have its digital footprint there. For the 5th floor, however, each apartment entry reads starkly, vacant. No leases active, no temporary arrangements, naught. Yet my daily patrols yielded contradictions. Apartment doors discovered slightly ajar, inviting conjecture. Footprints materialized in the settled dust. Sometimes my own echoes from the prior day, but other times fresh impressions, alien in size and tread. And then the sounds from behind closed doors, a low murmur like hushed conversation that would abruptly cease the moment I drew near to listen. The day the strangeness solidified into something undeniable began with the elevator doors parting onto a hallway, convulsed by a ceaseless, epileptic flickering overhead. Down the corridor's length, one door stood open, just a sliver. A potent chemical scent, sharp and clean like bleach, stung my nostrils. Muffled beneath it, a tune drifted tinny and warped by static, the signature of a poorly tuned, archaic radio. Unease coiled tight in my gut. I moved toward the offending door, my steps deliberate, unnaturally quiet. My own breathing sounded ragged in my ears, my palms felt damp. Reaching the threshold, I nudged the door wider. Darkness pooled within, punctuated by the feeble glow of a small lamp. Instantly, the music died, severed as if by a switch. I crossed into the void, thumbing my flashlight to life, its beam cutting through the gloom. Empty, utterly barren of furniture or any sign of life. I swept the light across every surface, peered into closets, checked the bathroom. Nothing. Yet the bleach odor lingered, potent and accusatory, and I fancied I heard a faint rustle, a whisper of movement behind me more than once. Its origin remained elusive. I relayed the incident to Mr. Finch, the building manager, his brow furrowed. Was I certain? Emphatically, yes. I described the open door, the music, the chemical smell. He seemed perplexed, reiterating the floor's vacancy, gesturing again toward the tenant list on his screen. Nobody's occupied the fifth in years, he stated, suggesting perhaps a maintenance worker had forgotten to secure the unit after a routine inspection. I logged it as an anomaly and endeavored to dismiss it. But the sensation only intensified with each passing day. Stepping from the elevator became an exercise in controlled anxiety, my heart thudding against my ribs, anticipating the unknown. Sometimes the corridor stretched before me, blessedly empty, the lights holding steady. Other times a distant door would again hang slightly open, or a faint light would glow behind the frosted glass of an apartment window. Initially, I fought to ignore it, focusing rigidly on my duties, checking for refuse, testing the stairwell lock, verifying exit signs. Yet something inevitably snagged my attention, an inexplicable sound, the groan of settling structure, a sudden localized drop in temperature that raised gooseflesh. My scalp would tighten, a sour knot forming in my stomach. I found myself compulsively aiming my flashlight beam into the gap beneath doors, half expecting to illuminate a pair of waiting feet, a fleeting shadow. No one was ever revealed, but the feeling of being watched, appraised, became a constant companion. One night, covering a late shift for a colleague, the building settled into its nocturnal quietude. Most residents slumbered, their windows dark squares against the city glow. Around midnight, ascending to check the roof access, I impulsively decided to pause at the 5th floor on my descent. Curiosity gnawed. What texture would its wrongness take at this hour? The elevator doors slid open onto absolute blackness. The overhead fixtures were extinguished, broken perhaps. My eyes struggled to adapt. As I stepped forward, a faint, ethereal humming reached me, like a radio caught between frequencies. I followed the sound toward an apartment at the corridor's far end. The door, this time, was firmly shut. I pressed my ear against the cool wood, My pulse hammered, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. Tentatively, I tried the knob. Locked. The humming persisted within. I knocked softly. The sound ceased instantly. Silence descended, thick and expectant. 10 seconds passed, maybe 15. It felt an eternity. I knocked again, louder. Still nothing. The realization struck me then, standing alone in the suffocating darkness before a locked door on a floor designated vacant. A chill traced its way up my spine, as if invisible eyes were fixed upon my back. My hands trembled as I raised the flashlight, its beam slicing nervously through the oppressive dark. Nothing. Defeated, I retreated. In the weeks that followed, these encounters grew more frequent, less subtle. A hallway light I'd replaced would be inexplicably dark the next day. I inspected the fixture, the wiring. Nothing ostensibly amiss. Faint scratches began to appear near several door frames, thin lines marring the paint, as if someone had fumbled with a lockpick or attempted leverage. Yet no break-ins were reported, no complaints lodged. The urge to involve the authorities flickered, but on what grounds? A collection of unsettling trifles easily dismissed. No tangible harm, nothing stolen. So I held back, nurturing a growing, insistent curiosity. One afternoon, fortified by lunch, I resolved to conduct a thorough sweep. All 6 units on the 5th floor. Armed with the master key and the justification that investigating unexplained phenomena fell under maintenance, I began with 501. Knock, wait, unlock, enter. Dust motes danced in the ambient light. Bare walls, empty floors. Closets gaped open, revealing nothing. The bathroom echoed hollowly. Unit 502 yielded the same sterile emptiness, and so on. By the time I reached the final door, 506, a sense of anticlimax had settled in, yet diligence demanded completion. The door to 506 yielded to the turn of the knob. Unlocked. I stepped inside, flashlight beam preceding me despite the functional overhead lights. This space felt different. The floor, while still dusty, bore signs of recent passage, cleaner than its neighbors. In one corner, a single lamp stood plugged into the wall socket. It was off, but when I touched the shade, it radiated a faint, residual warmth. Recently extinguished. Nearby lay a neatly folded blanket and a half-consumed bottle of water. I picked up the bottle, the water sloshing within. A common brand, locally sourced. My mouth turned arid, my stomach muscles clenched. Someone had been here, indisputably. The bathroom confirmed it. Cleaner tiles and imprinted upon them fresh footprints. I knelt, comparing them to my own boot. Smaller, indeterminate gender, but definitively not mine. The simple presence of the water bottle, the blanket, tightened a band around my chest. I wasn't imagining things. This wasn't some elaborate trick of perception. From that day, 506 became a focal point of my daily rounds. Its state varied, sometimes locked, sometimes open. Sometimes the lamp felt cool, other times that telltale warmth lingered. The blanket might be folded differently or absent altogether. Once I found the lamp illuminated, the previous water bottle replaced with a new one, a different brand. The thought of installing a discreet camera surfaced, but Mr. Finch vetoed it. Privacy regulations he'd cited, demanding concrete proof of squatting first. He still clung to the floor's vacant status, gently inquiring if perhaps stress or fatigue was coloring my perceptions. No, I insisted. I knew what I was witnessing. About 2 months into this unsettling rhythm, Subtle disturbances began to echo beyond the 5th floor, reaching down to my own small office on the ground level. As my shift concluded, I'd catch the faint scuff of footsteps receding down the hallway. Each time I rose to investigate, the corridor stretched empty. The night guard swore no one had passed. Lobby cameras showed only my own solitary figure. A chilling possibility began to form. Was the presence from 506 following me? A new layer of anxiety coated my routine. Every elevator ride became fraught. My breath would hitch, my hand tremble slightly before pressing the button for 5. My phone became a talisman clutched tightly, poised to summon aid, though the need never quite crystallized into action. It was always just me, eventually, standing on that wrong-feeling floor, sometimes breathing in that faint, stale scent of bleach, sometimes hearing the distant murmur of a phantom radio. One evening, nearing the end of my rounds, the sharp report of a slamming door cracked the silence from above. Unmistakably the 5th floor, the sound reverberated down the stairwell. Adrenaline surged. Forsaking the elevator, I pounded up the concrete steps, my heart hammering against my ribs, sweat beading on my forehead. Bursting through the 5th floor stairwell door, I found the corridor plunged into near darkness, save for a single, erratically flickering bulb. No movement. I advanced slowly, flashlight beams sweeping left, then right. Then I heard it, soft, distinct footsteps directly behind me. I whirled around, nothing but empty, shadowed space. My heart threatened to escape my chest. I fought to regulate my breathing. The footsteps resumed, seeming to circle me now, their source maddeningly elusive. For perhaps 30 agonizing seconds, I stood rooted, turning the flashlight in trembling arcs. Then, as abruptly as they began, the sounds ceased. The profound silence rushed back in. I moved toward 506, half expecting the door to stand open. It was locked. I knocked. Silence answered. I stared at the doorknob, debating the use of my key. Just then, a quiet click sounded from within, the distinct noise of a light switch being flipped off. My mouth was sandpaper. I knocked again, more forcefully. Still silence. Adrenaline sang in my veins, twisting my gut into a knot. Decision made, I retrieved the key, slid it into the lock, turned. The door swung inward on darkness. My flashlight beam stabbed into the room. The blanket gone. The lamp remained in its corner, but now its cord lay coiled and unplugged. I scanned the bathroom, empty, checked the small entryway closet, bare. I even peered under the sink, feeling absurd, but driven by a desperate need for confirmation. Whoever, whatever had been inside had vanished. Each subsequent day solidified my conviction. Either someone was deliberately tormenting me, playing an elaborate game, or an unseen resident dwelled here, adept at evasion. There was never any sign of violence, no damage beyond the flickering lights and scratched paint, and never a single complaint from tenants on other floors. Yet the tension coiled tighter within me each time I breached the 5th floor's threshold. I began to postpone its inspection until the very end of my shift, hoping the clarity of daylight might dispel the shadows, literal and figurative. But even under the afternoon sun, the oddness persisted. Lights flickered without cause, doors groaned softly, and sometimes that faint, static-laced music would drift down the hallway, its source always dissolving before I could pinpoint it. I searched every conceivable hiding place, closets, cabinets, utility access panels. Nothing. One afternoon, I decided to wait. Inside 506. I settled onto the floor, my back against the cool plaster, flashlight off, phone heavy in my hand. The room was utterly still, save for the almost imperceptible hum from the overhead light fixture. Minutes crawled by, stretching into an aching stillness. My legs grew stiff. I shifted, listening, every nerve strained. After perhaps half an hour, a sound, a gentle, hesitant knock on the apartment door. My heart leaped. Soundlessly, I rose, creeping toward the door, holding my breath. Another knock, just as soft, deliberate. Sweat bloomed on my palms. I stood frozen beside the door, torn between waiting and confrontation. Impulse won. I gripped the knob, yanked the door open violently, ready to face whoever stood there. The hallway stretched before me, vacant and silent. I stepped out, scanned left and right, checked the stairwell entrance. No one. A cold sweat prickled the back of my neck. Never had something so small felt so profoundly unnerving. Following this, I presented my case again to Mr. Finch, insisting I had compelling reasons to believe someone was illicitly occupying the 5th floor. He agreed, reluctantly, to accompany me the next morning. Together, we toured the level, checking every unit, culminating in 506. Everything was pristine, empty, undisturbed. Finch cast a look my way, a mixture of puzzlement and thinly veiled skepticism. He advised me to keep him informed and departed. Frustration warred with a chilling sense of helplessness. I knew what I experienced, yet tangible proof remained infuriatingly elusive. Over time, a slow understanding dawned. I wasn't merely searching for evidence of a squatter anymore. I was seeking something to validate the profound sense of dread that clung to me whenever I was on that floor. An explanation remained absent, yet the dusty floors continued to register fresh footprints, and the hallway lights persisted in their erratic behavior, defying my repeated replacements. The phantom radio still played its mournful, distant tunes, though the instrument itself remained undiscovered. Now, every time the elevator ascends to 5, my stomach clenches. The flashlight becomes an extension of my hand, gripped like a weapon against the unseen. My movements are measured, my breathing consciously shallow. I no longer hurry through the inspection. Each step is deliberate. I listen for the telltale humming, the whisper of static-laced music. I anticipate the slam of a door, the turn of a knob. The sensation of being watched is more frequent, more intense, but my pursuer remains invisible. I always depart that floor with the unshakable certainty that someone is there, watching from the periphery, perhaps just around the next corner, patiently waiting for my retreat. No matter how I strategize, how alert I remain, they perpetually elude me. What course remains? The police require more than feelings and flickering lights. Management demands proof before sanctioning surveillance, and my duties compel my return. So I continue. I check. I feel the presence. I steel myself against the erosion of my nerve. The 5th floor is designated empty, yet it teems with an invisible life. Doors are found ajar, lights switch themselves on, music plays from nowhere. Each day I enter, torn between hoping for normalcy and craving a definitive encounter, anything to provide answers. But answers never come. Only the quiet, suffocating tension, a constant pressure as I complete my rounds. and each day I step back into the elevator physically alone, yet utterly convinced that I am not. My tenure at that forsaken property was meant to be fleeting, a brief interlude, yet the very first sundown rewrote my intentions entirely. Silas and Maeve, my grandparents, had bequeathed me their ranch, a place I'd envisioned as a sanctuary of quietude. Simple mending, the tonic of untainted air, evenings steeped in silence, these were my expectations. What I hadn't anticipated were the phantom stenches, the brutal scoring of heavy claws, or the percussive violence erupting from the barn. Fear, raw and visceral on land that was ostensibly mine. That particular sensation was never part of the inheritance plan. Now those nights are indelible, etched into my consciousness. I feel compelled to articulate the sequence of events, to lay bare the experience with stark clarity, leaving no room for ambiguity. This isn't a memory one simply shelves or dismisses. It gnaws at my waking hours, a relentless reel replaying each disquieting detail. It commenced thusly. Upon arrival, the initial hours dissolved into the mundane task of unpacking within the main house. The structure itself seemed weary, resigned. Exterior paint surrendered in long, curling ribbons. The porch floorboards groaned underfoot, certain planks offering a disconcerting give. Their repair became an immediate mental note. Inside, spectral sheets draped over time-worn furniture yielded to my touch, releasing motes that swirled in the afternoon light, admitted through newly opened windows. A musty perfume of mold and desiccated wood permeated the air, catching in my throat, provoking coughs. Eventually locating a broom, I began the rhythmic sweep, a familiar chore grounding me momentarily. Fatigue settled in, yet determination spurred me onward. This place would become habitable. Around noon, the barn beckoned from the property's far edge. Arthur, my father, often spoke of its antiquity, asserting it predated the house, a relic built by his own grandfather, Jedediah, for livestock long since vanished. The earth surrounding it was baked hard, fractured, pierced by defiant weeds. Its great door listed weary on corroded hinges. Even before I laid a hand on it, a stale, contained odor seeped out. The hinges shrieked in protest as I applied pressure, unleashing a gust of stagnant air. Within, dust particles pirouetted in the sparse shafts of sunlight, knifing through gaps in the walls. The interior was cavernous, largely void save for decaying planks, corroded implements, and a substantial wooden crate huddled in a corner. The ground beneath was a rough tapestry of packed dirt and scattered straw. An unexpected chill traced my spine, a sensation I initially brushed aside. My gaze caught on the left wall, arrested by deep scars marring the wood, unmistakably claw marks. Each incision bit savagely into the timber, leaving ragged splinters. I recall tracing their length, the grooves roughly spanning my hand. They spoke of immense power, of thick, rending talons. My pulse quickened, a frantic drum against my ribs, though I fought for composure. Perhaps some unfortunate animal had become trapped. A plausible initial hypothesis. Yet multiple sets scarred the wood, at varying heights, crisscrossing in a frenzy that suggested a desperate, multi-angled assault to escape. Following the marred surface towards the rear corner, my eyes fell upon a shattered section of planking near knee height. The edges were violently splintered, torn outward. Something had forced its exit. Adjacent to this breach, impressions marred the packed earth. Footprints. They were vast, dwarfing any canine or coyote track I knew. Their morphology was peculiar, lacking the clean definition of a paw, appearing more splayed, accompanied by a dragging signature in the dirt, as if the creature moved with a burdensome limp. Crouching, I examined them closer. They led towards the barn's rear, terminating abruptly near a stack of weathered boards. A wave of profound unease washed over me. My heart hammered. Touching the ground, the dirt felt cold, dense, yet I could discern the faint outline of what might be digits or claws. No fresh scat, no other biological sign offered explanation. Rising, I consciously tried to dispel the encroaching dread. Deep breaths, a forced return to pragmatism. Exploration must continue. The barn's dominant scent was age, yet beneath it, a faint, unsettling undertone lingered, something akin to damp fur, a raccoon perhaps, or something larger that had taken shelter. I circled the perimeter, scrutinizing every nook. No living creature revealed itself, no recent evidence of habitation, but the disturbing images of claws and anomalous prints remained stubbornly lodged in my thoughts. A glance at my watch revealed the day waning swiftly. Retreating to the house, I prepared a meager meal. Bread, tinned soup, bottled water, consumed on the porch as the sun bled pale orange across the horizon. The breeze cooled my skin. Profound quiet reigned, broken only by the susurrus of leaves. My gaze drifted inevitably towards the barn. It seemed to hoard the dwindling light, appearing preternaturally darker than its surroundings. I averted my eyes, discomfort stirring. Those marks, those prints. Surely a mundane explanation existed. I clung to that thought. Night fell, and I settled into the antiquated bedroom. The mattress offered scant comfort, the linens a coarse embrace. My possessions were few, a duffel bag, my phone. Sleep proved elusive. Each time consciousness began to fray, a phantom sound from outside would snap it taut again. Hours passed before a fragile relaxation allowed me to drift. Then, deep in the night stillness, a muffled bang jolted me awake. Initially, I lay suspended between sleep and waking, questioning its reality. A second bang followed, heavier this time. It emanated from the barn, the unmistakable impact of something striking the door. Slipping from bed, flashlight in hand, I crept to the window. No visible movement disturbed the moonlit yard. The barn stood monolithic, silent, yet the sound repeated, a weighty thud against wood. My heart leaped into a frantic rhythm. Pulling on jeans and shoes, I ventured outside. The night air was sharp, cold against my bare arms. A keen, alien scent tainted the breeze, like scorched hair or burnt rubber. My pulse surged. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the barn, each footstep raising small puffs of dust. 10 feet away, a low growl rumbled from within. Deep, guttural, sustained, a primal warning. I froze. My flashlight beam danced across the aged wood of the door. I saw it tremble faintly, subtly, as if under pressure from the other side. My hand began to shake, a tremor betraying the urge to flee back to the perceived safety of the house. Hello? My own voice sounded thin, reedy. The growling ceased. Silence descended, thick with anticipation. Then a soft scrape against the door, the dry rasp of claws dragging across the surface. My mouth turned to dust. The miasma of damp fur and burnt matter intensified, nauseatingly potent. Sweat beaded on my skin despite the chill. One hesitant step forward, my hand reaching out to touch the door. It vibrated with another low thud from beyond. Then utter stillness. I held my breath, straining to hear anything. My flashlight casting erratic patterns on the ground, mirroring my own internal tremor. Standing there indefinitely was untenable. With agonizing slowness, I pulled the barn door open. It groaned, a protracted shriek of metal. The flashlight beam sliced into the darkness, illuminating patches of straw, a segment of a support beam, then vacant space. No creature met my gaze. My eyes swept the shadowed corners. Nothing stirred. The stench was overpowering now, a vile cocktail of wet canine and charred wood. Steeling myself, I stepped inside, the light probing the interior. No animal, no fresh tracks. Crouching, I directed the beam towards the far wall. Fresh scratches gleamed, raw against the older scars. Splintered wood lay scattered beneath, clearly recent. The new marks trailed sideways, ending near the broken section of wall I'd noticed earlier. A sudden urge to check the exterior around the back seized me, but was instantly shattered as the barn door slammed shut behind me with violent finality. I leaped, nearly fumbling the flashlight, heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Whirling, I seized the handle, wrenching the door open once more. A gust of wind met me as I stumbled back outside. Frantically, I swept the flashlight beam across the yard, probing the darkness. Nothing. My own breathing sounded ragged, harsh in the stillness. Exhaustion warred with stark terror. I retreated hastily to the house, bolted the door, and spent the remainder of the night huddled on the couch, every light blazing. My mind churned, grasping at explanations. A feral dog of unusual size, a displaced bear, something else. Yet none felt adequate. The peculiar shape of the footprints, the pervasive, unique stench. Besides, bears were unheard of in this region. The ranch lay far from their known territories. Dawn found me stiff-backed, nursing a headache, a bitter taste coating my tongue. Coffee heated on the ancient stove offered little solace but helped steady my trembling hands. Ignorance was no longer an option. Answers were needed, whatever resided in that barn. Donning work boots, gloves, and arming myself with a more substantial flashlight and a pry bar for potential leverage, I faced the morning. Sunlight painted the ranch in deceptive tranquility. The barn door hung ajar precisely as I'd left it. Forcing myself forward, I entered, undertaking a meticulous re-examination of every recess. The offensive odor, though diminished by daylight, still clung persistently to the aged wood. Behind crates, beneath boards, along the walls, nothing living, nothing dead. My attention fixed on the fresh scratches. They differed subtly from the previous day's findings. Cleaner cuts, the wood fibers freshly torn. Near one set, snagged on a splinter, I found a clump of coarse hair, dark gray, almost black. It felt unnervingly oily between my gloved fingers. Mechanically, I collected it in a small plastic bag, unsure of my purpose but vaguely thinking of identification, while a deeper dread whispered it might match nothing familiar. Silence became my companion as I worked, circling the barn's foundation. Another set of tracks materialized near the rear breach, tracing a short path towards a dense thicket of bushes before abruptly vanishing. I began clearing debris, hoping to uncover a hidden lair. Hours bled away, yielding no definitive nest or den. Lunch was a sandwich consumed while perched on an overturned bucket near the barn entrance. Mid-chew, a faint rustling, a subtle shuffle, seemed to emanate from a shadowed corner. I froze, breath held captive. Standing, peering into the gloom, revealed only dancing dust motes and the inert stack of crates. That disquieting sensation returned, prickling my skin, tightening my stomach. Calm, I told myself. Stay calm. The second night arrived with unwelcome speed as the sun dipped below the hills, casting elongated shadows across the yard. I resolved to observe the barn from a distance. Leaning against my truck near the house, flashlight ready, pry bar close, I watched. Crickets began their nightly chorus. A soft breeze stirred the tall grass. After perhaps an hour, a flicker of movement near the barn door, a swift, indistinct blur. The door rattled once, then stilled. Heartbeat accelerating, I advanced, sweeping the flashlight beam across the entrance. No discernible shape, no animal, no person. I held the light steady on the door for a full minute, waiting. Nothing more occurred. A cold sweat traced a path down my spine. From the corner of the barn, another rustle. I swung the light. The beam illuminated tangled weeds, the decaying fence line. Still nothing concrete. Then, for a fleeting fraction of a second, 2 points of light reflected my beam before vanishing behind the fence. Eyes. I stood rigid, breath caught. They seemed too widely spaced for any common nocturnal animal, though certainty eluded me in the disorienting dark. My hand trembled, struggling to keep the flashlight beam steady. No sound of footfalls reached me, yet an undeniable sense of immense presence lingered, moving stealthily in the obscurity. The subsequent silence felt heavy, charged. I was alone in the yard, yet profoundly not alone. Something watched. The night became a vigil of restless pacing between house and barn. Futile attempts to catch a clear glimpse of the elusive presence. Intermittently, the low growl would resurface, sometimes from within the barn, sometimes from behind it. Proximity always resulted in its disappearance. The scent of damp fur would saturate the air, often laced with that acrid hint of burning, like scorched hair, turning my stomach each time. By the pre-dawn hours, adrenaline was my sole fuel. The need for answers warred with an escalating primal urge to flee. The ensuing days fell into a disturbing rhythm. Fresh gouges appeared on the barn walls. New tracks materialized in the dirt. More clumps of that dark, oily hair were discovered. The barn door bore fresh impacts, as if repeatedly slammed from within. Some mornings, I found patches of wood near the scratches that looked strangely charred, subtly blackened as if by a sudden, intense heat. Calling the authorities, animal control, a ranger, crossed my mind, but the sheer strangeness of it paralyzed me. How could I explain? The fear of being dismissed as unhinged was a potent deterrent. Instead, I reinforced the barn door with additional planks, hammered securely into place. It was a futile gesture. The nightly cacophony persisted, the banging, the guttural growls echoing across the otherwise silent property. Sleep became a forgotten luxury. My body protested the constant tension, nerves frayed to the breaking point. By week's end, I was a mere shadow of myself. On what would be my final night, the breaking point arrived. Seated in the living room's ancient armchair, bathed in the weak glow of a single lamp, I heard the familiar, violent rattling of the barn door commence. A spike of adrenaline shot through me. My palms grew slick. Rising, grabbing the flashlight and pry bar, I marched onto the porch, a volatile mix of fury and terror propelling me forward. Ignoring the frantic cadence of my heart, I strode directly to the barn. The door shuddered violently from within. Raising the pry bar, I struck the reinforced wood. "I know you're in there." The shout tore from my throat, ragged and trembling, born of desperation. A sharp, ferocious growl answered, deeper, more resonant than before, vibrating through the very wood beneath my hand. My knees threatened to buckle. The stench of wet fur slammed into me, thick and suffocating. I gagged, eyes watering from its sheer intensity. Then absolute silence fell once more. I must have stood there for a full minute, pry bar clutched tight, breathing raggedly, eyes burning from exhaustion. My entire frame shook. The barn door remained inert. The silence pressed in, heavy, palpable. Taking a shaky step back, the futility of confrontation struck me. This thing, whatever it was, could not be fought or driven off like some common pest. Fear, cold and sharp, resurged. My resolve crumbled. Leaving the barricade intact, I retreated to the house, locking every door, deciding my next move would be departure at dawn. The remaining hours were spent staring at the ceiling, punctuated by occasional knocks and distant growls, but I refused to venture out again. My body was strung too tight, my nerves utterly spent. At first light, I loaded my truck, abandoning any pretense of completing repairs. A final distant glance at the barn, a turn of the key in the ignition, and I left the ranch behind. The drive away was punctuated by compulsive checks of the rearview mirror, half expecting pursuit. I haven't returned. The property remains mine, a legal fact divorced from the visceral reality that forbids my presence. I've shared fragments of the experience with trusted friends, cloaked in vague terms, wary of disbelief or concern for my sanity. The truth remains elusive. The deep scratches, the anomalous tracks, the inexplicable smells and sounds defy rational explanation. All I know with certainty is that something resides there, something that made its ownership of the barn terrifyingly clear. Its presence was a palpable weight each night. That is my testimony. No body was found, no definitive visual confirmation obtained. It was never seen clearly in daylight. No physical harm befell me. I departed before escalation seemed inevitable. The barn still stands, I know, and the question haunts me. Does that entity still lurk within its shadows? Does it still prowl the grounds after dark, dragging its unseen weight, scoring the walls, leaving its strange, scorched signature on the wood? Certainty escapes me. All I possess is the unwavering conviction that I will never again set foot inside that structure. That place is now forbidden territory. The memory remains vivid when sleep attempts to claim me. The growls echo in the chambers of my mind. The scent of damp fur and burning material assaults my senses as if present in the room. I doubt that memory will ever truly fade. It feels too immediate, too raw. For now, distance is my only defense, my only hope. It must have been a fortnight ago, under the sterile luminescence of the bathroom late one evening, that the first tremor of wrongness touched me. The ritual was mundane, teeth brushed, the quiet hum of the house settling around me, leaning over the basin, expelling minty foam, rinsing, As I straightened, my own face regarded me from the silvered glass, familiar contours under the harsh, clinical light. I blinked, a natural, unconscious act. Yet, across that reflective plane, the answering blink seemed to hesitate. A fractional, fugitive lag. Fatigue, I reasoned. Or perhaps a trick of weary eyes. The discrepancy was so infinitesimal, a mere flutter, that I dismissed it, turning away without a second thought. But the seed, however small, had been planted. Dawn broke, pulling me from restless sleep. In the bathroom again, the fluorescent tubes flickered awake. Groggy, still half tangled in dreams, I confronted the mirror. My reflection offered no strangeness. I lifted my left hand. It raised its right, a perfect, instantaneous inversion. All seemed in order. Edging closer, I scanned the details. Eyes netted with red from poor sleep, skin pallid, an exact replica. A slow turn of my head, left then right. The image shadowed my movement with flawless synchronicity. No echo, no delay. Relief washed through me, cool and clean, as I exited. 2 days hence, the unease returned. Before the tall, leaning pier glass in my bedroom, my usual station for sartorial inspection, I was adjusting the lie of my collar. My hands fell to my sides, or rather, I dropped my hands. Across the glass, it felt as though the mirrored hands lingered, suspended for a heartbeat longer before mimicking my descent. I stared, transfixed. The reflection gazed back, impassive, utterly normal. Yet the phantom sensation of that minute delay prickled. I rubbed my eyes, blinked hard, searched again. Motion was simultaneous now, seamless. Imagination, surely. A tired mind playing tricks, I assured myself. Then came the morning shave. Face lathered, razor poised, concentration narrowed to the careful glide across my skin, avoiding nicks. The mirror directly ahead held my concentrating double. I paused, rinsing the blade under the tap. When my gaze lifted back to the glass, I was met with an unnerving focus. My reflection's eyes weren't just mirroring my line of sight. They seemed locked onto me, directly into my own eyes with an unnerving, preemptive intensity. It felt as if it had looked first. I froze, razor forgotten. Experimentally, I raised my eyebrows, twitched my lips, tilted my head. The reflection performed each action impeccably, yet the chilling conviction remained. It was observing me, not merely copying. My breath hitched, quickening. A band tightened around my chest. I twisted the faucet silent and fled the bathroom, shave unfinished. In the days that followed, I cultivated avoidance. A conscious effort not to dwell on mirrors, though their ubiquity made it a near impossible task. The bathroom, the bedroom, even the dark gleam of windows at night, betraying my image against the interior light. I began to avert my gaze from my own reflection, yet necessity forced encounters. Washing my face, taming my hair, checking for stray crumbs, and with each reluctant glance, tiny aberrations surfaced. A hand raised to scratch an ear seemed unmistakably to lag in the glass by a sliver of a second. Another time, executing a rapid series of blinks, I distinctly noted the reflection omitting one, its eyes remaining steady while mine fluttered. I recoiled into the hallway, breath sawing in my throat, convinced my sanity was fraying. I squeezed my eyes shut, counted to 10, a child's ward against the dark. Returning to the mirror, everything appeared synchronized once more, but the damage was done. The certainty of wrongness had taken root. A profound tension coiled within me whenever I neared a reflective surface. A queasiness in the gut, palms slick with sweat, the frantic thrumming of my heart against my ribs. I fought to maintain composure, to rationalize. Mirrors merely reflect, nothing more. But the evidence of my own senses screamed otherwise. A week later, the phenomenon escalated. Returning from a walk, shirt clinging slightly with perspiration, sleeves rolled, I stopped at the bathroom sink to wash my hands. After turning off the tap, I looked up. The reflection met my gaze, steady and direct. I shifted my head slightly. It followed perfectly. Then, deliberately, I lowered my eyes to the basin below. When I snapped my gaze back up to the mirror, its eyes were still fixed on me, unwavering as if they had never looked away. I stumbled back, staring, a tentative wave of one hand, then the other. The movements were mirrored instantly, yet the unshakable feeling persisted. It had been watching me independently, while my own attention was elsewhere. A cold dread spiderwebbed across my skin. I drew breath raggedly through my mouth, battling rising panic. Another test. I stared down at my feet for several seconds, then jerked my head up, fast. For the briefest, starkest instant, I caught its eyes locked on mine before they flickered into alignment, mirroring my posture. A split second, but definitive. Whatever inhabited that glass was no longer just a reflection. It was aware. A deep, visceral disquiet settled in my bones. I backed out of the room slowly, eyes riveted to the glass, watching it follow me until the doorframe cut off the view. That night, sleep was a distant shore. I lay entombed in darkness, staring at the void of the ceiling, bathroom door firmly shut. A nervous energy thrummed in my neck and shoulders. My throat felt like parchment. Swallowing offered no relief. The pulse in my ears became a frantic drumbeat against the silence. Closing my eyes only conjured the image of that reflection, staring, waiting for my gaze to falter, poised to act. Fitful, shallow sleep eventually claimed me, punctuated by abrupt awakenings, sweat-soaked and gasping. Morning arrived, and with it, a grim resolve. I rose, marched to the bathroom, and stood squarely before the mirror, meeting its gaze. Silence stretched. I simply watched, waiting. If it intended some deviation, I would face it directly. For long minutes, nothing. I raised an arm, lowered it, reflection matched, turned my head side to side. Perfect mimicry. Opened my mouth, closed it, synchronized. 5 minutes crawled by, my back aching with tension. Then I employed the earlier tactic. A quick glance away, feigning interest in the countertop, followed by a swift return to the glass. And there it was, undeniable. The reflection's eyes already fixed on mine, anticipating my look. The fine hairs on my arms prickled, my jaw clenched. Leaning closer, searching for any temporal flaw, I raised my right hand with deliberate slowness. The reflection's left hand rose in perfect concert. Fingers flexed, its fingers mirrored. I blinked erratically. It matched me. Blink for precise blink this time. Exhaling sharply through my nose, I drew nearer still, mere inches from the glass. Every pore, every capillary was visible, its eyes identical to mine, yet possessing an unnerving alertness, a sentience they shouldn't hold. Then, abruptly, shockingly, my reflection smiled. A small, fleeting upturn of the lips, almost a smirk, but I hadn't smiled. My own face remained taut, neutral, strained. I jerked back, freezing mid-motion. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. Instantly, the reflection's expression reverted, mirroring my own shocked neutrality. But the image was seared into my mind. It had smiled at me. Sweat beaded on my forehead. My breathing grew ragged. I looked away, then snapped back. Perfect mimicry again. The smile vanished as if it had never been. Stumbling from the bathroom, I slammed the door shut, pressing my back against the cool wood of the hallway wall, gasping. The phantom grin lingered behind my eyelids, my face yet utterly alien. My chest felt constricted. Nausea churned low in my stomach. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I resolved to banish the bathroom mirror from my sight for the day. Kitchen sink for hand washing. Averted eyes from the bedroom pier glass. Dim lights prevailed. The television screen offered faint, distorted reflections, but nothing clear enough to truly see my face. I busied myself with mundane tasks, washing dishes, arranging books, anything to occupy my hands and mind. But the thought of the smile gnawed relentlessly. It was swift, yes, but it was real. By late afternoon, the compulsion to verify, to know, became unbearable. Dread warred with the desperate need for confirmation. I returned to the bedroom, standing before the tall mirror in the soft, ambient light. My image looked back, jeans, plain t-shirt, unremarkable. Hand raised, reflection followed. Head turned, it turned. A small hop, mirrored perfectly. I locked eyes with my double, waiting. My stomach twisted into knots. Sweat slicked my palms again. Minutes stretched into an eternity. And then it happened again. The reflection's mouth quirked into that same fleeting, knowing grin. Just for a second. I leaped back as if struck. My own lips were pressed firmly together. Shaking my head, I rubbed my eyes fiercely, looked again. The grin was gone, my reflection a perfect passive copy once more. Shaking, I retreated from the mirror. A frantic survey of the apartment followed. Windows gleaming darkly now as evening fell promised more reflections. The thought spurred me to action. Fetching a towel, I returned to the bathroom. Holding it ready, I glanced one last time at the mirror. My reflection stood calmly, mirroring my posture. Hesitation warred with fear. Then swiftly, I draped the towel over the glass, pressing it flat against the surface. A wave of fragile relief washed over me. Blindness offered a temporary peace. Next, the bedroom mirror. An old bedsheet served to shroud its surface completely. The tension in my shoulders eased fractionally. Out of sight, perhaps. Out of mind. I sank onto the sofa, flicking on the television, volume muted low. Tried to lose myself in the flickering images, the disembodied voices. But my thoughts kept circling back to the hidden glass, to the presence behind the cloth. I knew it was still there, knew that uncovering the mirrors would reveal it, staring, perhaps smiling again, perhaps something else. My awareness sharpened to every potentially reflective surface. The microwave door, the dark screen of my phone, the glass protecting a framed photograph. I found myself consciously avoiding their gaze, keeping my eyes lowered, fixed on dull, matte objects. Sleep that night was a fraught landscape, the covered mirrors casting long shadows in my mind. I woke repeatedly, sweating, ears straining against the apartment's nocturnal creaks, gripped by the paranoid urge to check if the coverings had slipped. Once I succumbed, padding silently through the dark to confirm the towel, and sheet remained firmly in place. A thin sliver of relief allowed me back to bed. The next morning, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't quell, I pulled the towel from the bathroom mirror, stood there, faced myself. It looked normal. The look away, look back test yielded nothing. Perfect synchronization. I waited for the smile. It didn't come. A sudden movement, raising both arms quickly, mirrored flawlessly. Mouth opened, closed. Perfect sync. I stared into its eyes, waiting. Breath held. Minutes passed. Then, subtle as a nerve twitch, the lips curled again. That infinitesimal, deliberate grin. Less than a second, but unmistakable. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping on the bath mat, catching myself on the doorframe. My reflection copied the clumsy recovery, but the preceding image, that independent, mocking smile, burned bright. It hadn't come from me. It felt intentional. With finality, I replaced the towel, backing out of the bathroom. The decision was made. All mirrors, all significant reflective surfaces would remain covered. I scoured the apartment, shrouding anything that offered a clear image, even removing framed pictures, storing them away in a closet. I minimized my reflections, resorting to brief, wary glances at my phone's front camera when absolutely necessary. Days have bled into one another under this new regime. The tension hasn't vanished. It hums beneath the surface, a constant low-grade dread. The memory of that grin is a persistent phantom. It was real. I know what I saw. There's no rational explanation, no understanding of the mechanism behind this intrusion. Something is fundamentally wrong within the silvered glass. Looking at my own reflection now feels like inviting scrutiny from something alien. There's a palpable sense that giving it attention, engaging with it, might provoke something worse than a fleeting smile. What that might be, I cannot fathom, nor do I wish to. So I sit here recounting this, mirrors veiled, hoping that neglect might starve the phenomenon, might return my reflection to its passive state. Things are far from normal. The unease is a constant companion, but those mirrors will remain covered. I saw my reflection smile when I did not. That is certainty enough. I have no curiosity left, only exhaustion and a gnawing fear. I never want to see that grin again. Silence met me, thick and absolute, where the familiar matins of birdsong should have been. That void was the first premonition. Emerging from the canvas shelter into the pearlescent gloom of dawn, a disquiet coiled low in my gut. The air hung unnaturally still, heavy with mist and something else, something indefinable and wrong. We'd been immersed in this wilderness for 3 days, myself, Kalen, my oldest friend, and Lyra, his partner. A week's escape, we'd called it, a severing from the clamor of the world. But surveying the clearing now, the blood in my veins turned to glacial melt. Etched deep into the bark of every sentinel tree encircling our camp were aberrant sigils, complex non-terrestrial geometries that seemed to throb with a faint internal luminescence in the nascent light. They formed a seamless glyphic cordon, an unbroken perimeter utterly absent when slumber claimed us. Kalen, my voice was a scraped whisper, barely disturbing the profound quiet. Kalen, you need to witness this. Fabric rustled within the tent, then Kalen's sleep-thickened voice. What is it? Sun's barely up. Just come out, please. Moments later, he stumbled out, scrubbing at his eyes. He saw the markings and froze mid-motion, the color draining precipitously from his face. Gods above, what is this? Lyra appeared beside him then, her gaze widening as she absorbed the impossible tableau. Did you two carve these? Her voice held a tremor. I shook my head, a slow, negative motion. No chance. They weren't here last night. Someone, or something, inscribed them while we slept. We stood suspended in stunned silence, the sheer impossibility sinking into our bones like frost. An intruder, moving with impossible stealth mere feet away, branding the forest around us, unheard. Kalen, ever the pragmatist, broke the spell first. Right, no panicking. Could be local kids. A messed up prank. Let's pack. Now, back to the trailhead. Gratitude surged for his attempt at normalcy. A frantic energy gripped us, dismantling our temporary home under the perceived scrutiny of those glyphs. Their alien configurations seemed to track our movements, inducing a low thrum of nausea if stared at too long. The true depth of our predicament revealed itself only as we neared completion. Kalen had gone to retrieve the bear bag, our provisions, hoisted high against nocturnal foragers. He returned empty-handed, face blanched, lips tight. Severed clean, he rasped, holding up the frayed end of the rope. The sustenance vanished. Lyra gasped, a small, sharp sound. But how? We would have heard the noise. A visceral chill traced my spine. This wasn't mischief, this was deliberate isolation. Maybe, I offered, forcing steadiness into my tone. There's an emergency cache marked, a ranger outpost we missed. Kalen nodded, already unfolding the familiar topography. But as the map spread, hope curdled into bafflement, then stark terror. It's wrong, he breathed, defiled. I peered over his shoulder, my stomach plummeting. The paper chart, our guide for 3 days, was now a palimpsest overlaid with the same maddening script that hemmed us in. Trails, contours, landmarks, all swallowed by the invasive symbology. Okay, I managed, drawing a ragged breath. Okay, we know the bearing. East, due east. We just push through. We have to hit a service road eventually. We shouldered our packs, facades of resolve crumbling internally. We plunged east into a verdure suddenly grown hostile. Trees loomed, impossibly tall, their bark seeming rougher, darker. Light fractured strangely through the dense canopy, casting shadows that writhed with unnatural life. Peripheral flickers teased the edges of sight, fleeting movements that vanished when confronted directly. Hours bled away. By any rational measure, the trailhead should have been near, yet the woods only deepened, becoming more primeval, more suffocating. Water dwindled, hunger gnawed with sharp teeth. We have to stop, Kalen declared finally, his voice strained taut. Regroup. We found a small, mossy hollow and shed our burdens. While Lyra carefully apportioned the last swallows of water, I sought perspective, ascending a gnarled giant, hoping for a landmark. The vista from the crown crushed what little hope remained. Below, an endless viridian ocean stretched unbroken to every horizon. No roads, no cabins, no sign of human passage. And worse, far worse, etched into distant trunks, I could discern more sigils, arranged in vast, nested rings closing around us like a snare. Not escape, but convergence. Relaying this bleak intelligence to Kaelin and Lyra felt like extinguishing final embers. Their faces fell, mirroring the hollowness blooming inside me. "What could possibly want this?" Lyra whispered, her voice fragile as spun glass. Before thought could form an answer, a brittle snap echoed from the woods behind us. We pivoted as one, straining our eyes against the encroaching twilight. Poised at the tree line, an entity defied geometry. Tall, skeletal thinness, limbs jointed all wrong, moving with a horrifying fluidity. Its surface churned like visual noise, unstable, shifting, and woven into its mutable form like tattoos on warping flesh were the very symbols that imprisoned us. Instinct screamed. We fled, a blind scramble through grasping undergrowth, terror lending wings to our exhaustion. Branches clawed like skeletal fingers, roots snagged like tripwires. Behind us, a presence paced, unhurried, inexorable, its proximity a palpable pressure. Night crashed down, absolute and ink-dark, our struggling flashlights carving feeble cones in the oppressive black. We ran until muscles screamed and lungs burned, finally collapsing into a shallow depression cradled by the roots of a colossal ancient tree. Gasping, trembling, reality asserted its terrible weight. Lost in a mutable wilderness, pursued by the inconceivable, without food, water nearly gone. The gravity wasn't sinking in, it was crushing us. "What now?" Lyra breathed, her hand gripping Kaelin's with white-knuckled intensity. I opened my mouth, but emptiness met me. What platitude could possibly serve? What lie could soften this? Then the sound, not heard, but felt. A resonant, low-frequency thrumming originating from the fabric of the air itself. From everywhere and nowhere. Glyphs materialized around us, shimmering, untethered from bark, floating like spectral embers in the darkness. "Oh God," Kaelin choked out, "they're here." The humming intensified, coherence dissolving. Pressure built behind my eyes, a psychic intrusion, brutal and intimate. Visions flooded in, unbidden, overwhelming. Cyclopean architectures beneath alien suns. Beings of pure geometry moving through folded space. Dimensions tearing and healing like fragile membranes. And always the symbols, pulsing, shifting, conveying a meaning just beyond the threshold of human sanity. I don't know how long we endured that psychic storm, assaulted by glimpses of the utterly other. Minutes? Aeons. It ceased as abruptly as it began. When vision cleared, the forest was gone. We lay upon cool, seamless obsidian stretching into impossible vastness. Sigils pulsed everywhere. Walls, floor, ceiling, the chamber's very substance. And we were encircled by them, the entities, dozens strong, their forms fluid insults to biology, watching with apertures that were not eyes. One detached itself, coalescing into a semblance of form, almost recognizable yet fundamentally wrong. "You are selected," the thought bloomed, unbidden within my skull. Not sound, but pure concept imprinted. To perceive, to comprehend, to become. I tried to recoil, to scream, to wake from this waking nightmare, but my limbs were unresponsive, my body a vessel no longer mine. Your world is membrane, thin and easily breached, the silent voice continued. We are the threshold sentinels, the keepers of ways. You will join the vigil. As the meaning resonated, a cellular revolt began within me. My flesh flowed, rippled, became. Unspeakable growths erupted where familiar limbs had been. A silent scream contorted features no longer mine. Across the expanse I perceived Kaelin and Lyra, writhing in mirrored agony, their human forms surrendering to the alien template. Then perception itself fractured, reformed, expanded into dimensions previously unimaginable. We arrived at the forest's edge as human. We departed as sentinels of the threshold. We became the Watchers. Back in the world we'd known, reports would surface of 3 more hikers vanished without trace. Search parties would find only perplexing carvings in trees. And the woods, patient and profound, awaited the next pilgrims hungry for transformation. The cycle endures. We ensure it. Departure was a breath away that night, the theater's velvet hush settling around me. My rounds were complete, the familiar checklist ticked off in my weary mind. Home, a simple sanctuary, was the sole magnetic pull. Yet, paused by the mixing console, a phantom thread of sound snagged my attention. A delicate hum leaking through the main microphone feed. A woman's voice weaving a melody I couldn't place. In that instant, the mundane fractured. My gaze fixed on the vacant, dimly lit stage, my pulse kicking against my ribs like a trapped bird. No one occupied that space. The entire system slumbered on standby. A glitch? Radio interference bleeding across frequencies? Illogical, yet preferable to the alternative. I resolved to trace the lines one last time, a final diligence before yielding to exhaustion. Midnight found me still there, methodically testing every connection, every input, finding nothing amiss. But the echo of that hum lingered, imprinted on the quiet canvas of my thoughts. The following afternoon, sunlight slanting through the high windows, I returned for the pre-show rituals. Solitude was my preference then, a shield against queries and distractions. Power amps hummed to life, microphones submitted to their tests. All yielded only the expected clean silence. No spectral static, no disembodied voices. The evening's performance unfolded without incident. Afterward, amidst the comfortable routine of gathering stray cables, coiling them with practiced care, I lingered on the stage. The heavy back door clicked shut. The vast stage lights dimmed to black, and I descended once more to the booth for the final shutdown. And then it returned. The identical voice, but this time cascading through a different sequence of notes. A prickling sensation traced the nape of my neck, skin tightening involuntarily. I swallowed, a dry rasp in my throat, forcing calm. From the booth, I threw the stage lights back on, bathing the crimson curtains in a stark glare. Empty. The tiered seats, the aisles, the stage itself, a void, yet the sound persisted, undeniably channeled through the monitors. The fine hairs on my forearm lifted. A constricting band seemed to tighten around my chest. Channel by channel, I muted the inputs, but the ethereal song continued until the master mute silenced the entire board. Then absolute quiet rushed back in. Morning brought hesitant confession to two colleagues, Javier and Maya. Their expressions shifted from polite interest to thinly veiled disbelief. Exhaustion, they suggested, played tricks on the ear. I offered no argument, though certainty coiled tight within me. Long hours were the bedrock of my profession. Vigilance against every tonal nuance, every whisper of feedback, every electronic sigh was not merely habit, but skill. Fabrication wasn't in my nature. During an afternoon lull, driven by a need for empirical proof, I launched a comprehensive diagnostic. Hours bled away, scrutinizing microphone lines, wireless transmitters, frequency allocations. Every component yielded to inspection, revealing no flaw. A part of me craved the relief of a technical culprit. A more honest, insistent part, however, felt a burgeoning curiosity, a nascent obsession. It hoped the voice wouldn't return, yet simultaneously yearned to hear it again, to understand. That evening, a musical filled the stage. I remained backstage, managing the wireless mics while Ms. Thorne, the stage manager, orchestrated cues from the wings. Normalcy reigned. Post-curtain call, the familiar rhythm resumed. Retrieving equipment, securing cables, plunging the stage into its nightly gloom. Back in the booth's isolated cocoon, a faint tremor of apprehension ran through me as I performed a final check on the main microphone. Alone, I spoke into it, testing 1, 2, watching the level meters dance predictably on the console. Silence answered. A fragile sense of relief bloomed, only to be instantly shattered by a whisper, soft as brushed velvet, seeming to form my name. Silas. I froze, rigid in my chair. A woman's voice, slow and low. The console's meters barely quivered, yet the sound was undeniable, bypassing logic and landing squarely in my awareness. My ears weren't deceiving me. A surge, hot and swift, flooded my chest. My mouth turned to dust. My palms grew slick. I spun around, scanning the shadowed expanse of the auditorium. Nothing. The stage remained a dark mouth. No flicker of movement. Leaning towards the microphone again, my voice tight, I managed, "Who's there?" Only a faint, dry crackle responded. Pushing back from the chair, I strode to the stage entrance and slammed the switch for the work lights. The cavernous space leapt into sharp relief. Rows upon rows of empty seats, bare aisles, the stark stage. Still vacant. An inexplicable compulsion made me lower my voice. "Is anyone here?" The question echoed, swallowed by the immensity. I prowled the backstage labyrinth, checking dressing rooms, dim corridors, shadowed alcoves. Each space offered only emptiness. Returning to the booth, I methodically powered everything down, forcing myself towards the exit, a tremor running through my limbs, a profound sense of displacement clinging to me. The next day, I mentioned it to Leo, our lighting guru. A smirk played on his lips. "Need a holiday, Silas," he chuckled. I couldn't fault his skepticism. It had all the hallmarks of a tired mind conjuring phantoms. Yet, a visceral certainty persisted. Something resided within those walls, an unseen current. That evening, I arrived deliberately early, a plan forming. I ascended the narrow stairs to the catwalks, navigating the dusty grid high above the stage. Perhaps a forgotten speaker, rogue wiring, some archaic source of feedback. I found only cobwebs clinging to thick cables and antiquated fixtures, nothing to explain a disembodied female voice. Around 5, Ms. Thorne arrived, mentioning the night's performance. A small-scale play, minimal demands. I kept my unsettling discoveries locked behind a neutral expression. Throughout the show, I remained tethered to the sound console, ears straining beneath the dialogue and sound cues. Flawless operation. Afterward, the familiar sequence: clear the stage, store the microphones, coil the cables, extinguish the stage lights. Approaching 11, back in the booth's relative safety, checking a final patch connection. The air felt thick, charged. Then the faint hum returned. I activated the monitors. The sound swelled, the strange melodic notes filling the booth. My chest resonated with a low vibration, my focus narrowing entirely onto the dark stage beyond the glass. Tentatively, I opened a single channel on the console, attempting to isolate the source. Instead, a distinct whisper emerged. "Come here." My body jerked as if struck, my jaw clamped shut. Beads of sweat prickled my forehead. I wanted to shout, to demand, but paralysis held me fast. The voice repeated, gentle yet deeply unnerving, "Come here." My stomach twisted. Shoving away from the console, I descended to the main floor, heart hammering against my ribs, legs feeling oddly distant and unreliable. Down the center aisle I walked, eyes fixed on the stage. Why this pull? Why the irrational sense that I had to obey? My name again, Silas, breathed so softly it was almost lost in the building's quiet hum. I mounted the stage steps, the floorboards groaning under my weight. Darkness enveloped me, save for the single spectral glow of the ghost light, standing sentinel upstage. My gaze swept over the heavy velvet curtains, the thick ropes disappearing into the fly space, the painted backdrop. All appeared static, ordinary, yet a sense of unseen movement prickled my senses. Slipping behind the main curtain, I navigated past stacked flats and a dust-shrouded piano silent for years. The voice ceased. I stood motionless, straining to catch any sound beyond the ever-present drone of the building's ventilation. My pulse throbbed in my ears, then a soft chuckle, seemingly from the stage left wing. I spun, nearly tangling my feet in a coiled power cord, flashlight beam stabbing into the darkness. It illuminated a door, the entrance to the basement storage, a place I seldom ventured, cluttered and musty. The laughter seemed to emanate from its vicinity. Hesitantly, I approached, light playing over grimy walls, stained concrete, forgotten pieces of scenery leaning precariously. The door handle turned easily, unlocked. Pushing it open, I peered down into the gloom. Dust motes danced in the flashlight's beam. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. I stepped onto the landing, testing the top step. My shoe scraped concrete. Behind me, the heavy door swung shut with a dull thud. I flinched, a sharp intake of breath escaping me. My hands trembled. "Hello!" My voice, unnaturally loud, bounced off the cold stone walls. Silence answered. Standing on the last step, I swept the light across the subterranean space. Rows of metal shelves burdened with defunct props and spare lighting gear lined the walls. A cluster of skeletal chairs huddled in a corner. The air felt denser here, colder. Fumbling, I found the string for the bare overhead bulb. It flickered weakly, casting a sallow light over the dust and cobwebs. Methodically, I searched, peering behind shelves, under draped tables. Nothing. No one. A wave of unease washed over me. Coming down here felt like a profound mistake. My skin crawled. The urge to flee was potent. Turning back towards the stairs, the voice whispered my name again. Silas. So close the sound seemed to brush against my ear, raising goosebumps. I whirled, flashlight beam trembling. A shadow flickered near a stack of old canvas flats. My heart hammered violently enough to shake my hand. I tried to speak, but my throat constricted. My feet, leaden, carried me forward. Approaching the stacked scenery, the air thick with anticipation, I felt lightheaded. Nothing leaped out. I continued probing with the light, kicking aside empty cardboard boxes, searching for any recess where someone could hide. Only dust and debris. Then the faintest sensation, a cool brush of air against the back of my neck, like a sigh exhaled inches away. My entire body went rigid. I spun again, the flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc. A single word whispered so low it was almost subliminal. Stay. My knees buckled, invisible yet undeniably present. I struggled for breath, trying to anchor my racing thoughts. Sweat dripped down my temples. Escape now. I yanked the light cord, plunging the basement back into darkness, scrambled up the steps, and pushed through the door. The backstage area seemed unchanged, yet my senses screamed alert, anticipating an appearance. Empty. I placed the flashlight on a nearby shelf, locked the basement door firmly behind me, deliberately ignoring the lingering presence. Speed walking to the booth, I killed the remaining power with frantic haste and practically bolted through the main exit, fumbling with the locks. The tremor in my hands not subsiding until I was home, curtains drawn, the silence of my own space feeling thin and fragile. The following days were fraught with tension. Avoiding solitude in the theater became a strategic game, though the nature of my work often demanded late hours. I manufactured reasons for early departures, but inevitably, the duty of closing fell to me again. That night, I vowed speed and efficiency. Final checks on the board, cables coiled in determined silence. I'd set my phone to play music, a low barrier against the encroaching quiet. It proved futile. Minutes into my work, the music abruptly ceased. My phone screen glowed, the track paused as if by an unseen hand. And then, through the monitors, clear and resonant, the female voice. "Don't ignore me." My hands clenched, trembling. Dryness seized my throat. I felt utterly absurd, yet the words escaped my lips in a ragged whisper. "What do you want?" The response seemed to materialize directly behind me. "Follow." My heart slammed against my sternum, threatening to crack ribs. Drawn by an invisible tether, I moved towards the stage door, eyes darting into the shadowed hallways. Empty, dark. I hesitated, caught between primal instinct screaming flight and a powerful gnawing curiosity. I crept through the backstage warren, footsteps muffled, senses hyper-alert. A low hum resurfaced, a single sustained note seeming to emanate from the stage-left area. It guided me past towering crates and racks draped in costumes. The hum led me to a specific point, then vanished. A locked supply closet. I tested the knob. Secured. A jolt of sharp frustration hit me. A conviction formed. The answer lay within that small room. But the key was not mine. Backing away, I conceded defeat for the night. Back in the booth, I gathered my backpack, the mystery of the closet churning in my mind. It held obsolete sound equipment, forgotten relics. Why there? Tomorrow, I decided, I would ask Ms. Thorne for the key. Sleep offered little respite, my mind replaying the whispers, the hum. The next morning, feigning a need for inventory, I requested the supply closet key from Ms. Thorne. She handed it over with an indifferent shrug, asking no probing questions. I waited until the theater emptied, the vast space settling into its nocturnal quiet. Anticipation warred with dread as I walked towards the closet, the key cold in my palm. The corridor smelled faintly of fresh paint from a newly touched-up set piece. My own footsteps echoed unnervingly on the concrete. Reaching the door, I inserted the key. The lock yielded with a sharp click. I pushed the door inward and flipped the light switch. A single naked bulb illuminated the cramped space. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with ancient mixing consoles, fractured microphones, and nests of tangled cables. Dust lay thick on everything. I moved cautiously, scanning for anything unusual. Nothing seemed disturbed. Then the overhead light flickered erratically. A chill traced patterns on my arms. An odd pressure built in my chest. The hum returned, soft yet pervasive, seeming to originate from within the closet walls themselves. I lifted the lid of a heavy road case, revealing a dilapidated mixer, its surface layered with grime. In one corner, initials were crudely scratched into the metal, obscured by time. The hum intensified, a physical vibration now. Adrenaline surged. I glanced back at the open doorway. The corridor remained empty. Softly, I spoke into the small space. "I'm here. What is it? What do you want me to see?" The hum ceased abruptly. Silence pressed in, amplifying the sound of my own ragged breathing. Then a sigh, delicate and distinct, directly behind my ear. I spun, flashlight beam cutting through the small space. Nothing. My lungs burned. Sweat slicked my back. I leaned against a shelf, fighting to control my hammering heart. Without warning, the overhead bulb extinguished, plunging the closet into near total darkness, relieved only by my flashlight's wavering beam. A whisper followed, intimate and warm against my ear, the words unintelligible, but the presence suffocatingly close. Pure instinct took over. I scrambled for the door, desperate for escape. Flashlight beam dancing wildly. As I reached the threshold, poised to flee, my name sounded again. Silas. Clear as a spoken word, inches away. I froze, unable to turn, stomach churning, knees threatening to give way. I stumbled out, slammed the door shut, and fumbled with the lock, hands shaking violently. I fled the hallway, not bothering with lights, needing only the vastness of the outside air. Leaning against the cool brick exterior, I gulped deep breaths, body drenched in sweat, head pounding. The presence, the voice, it had led me there, to that closet, but the purpose remained veiled. Was it a warning, an invitation? Was the theater itself sentient, playing games with my perception? I refused to re-enter that night. Sharing this felt impossible now. Disbelief was a certainty. In the nights that followed, the voice persisted. Sometimes a fleeting melodic fragment caught on the edge of hearing. Other times my name, whispered across the empty seats. The pull remained, a terrifying allure. I streamlined my closing routine, minimizing my time alone in the echoing space. Tension became my constant companion within those walls. Each time the voice manifested, the familiar physical responses flared. The knot in my gut, the parched mouth, the frantic drumming in my ears. I still work in that grand old theater. Every evening as the last patrons depart and the house lights dim, I steel myself. Alone, I move through the familiar tasks, checking connections, coiling cables, perpetually glancing over my shoulder, waiting. The basement remains locked. The supply closet door stays shut, but the voice is never truly gone. It hovers, a persistent frequency just beyond comprehension, urging discovery, or perhaps surrender. I tell myself it's manageable, a phantom of the wires, a trick of acoustics. But the certainty remains, cold and hard in my gut. It's not a glitch. And each night, as the last employee out, I feel my muscles clench, braced for the next whisper, the next hum, the next inexplicable call from the silence.